everyone. Welcome to our series, which marks the 143rd anniversary of the first Girmitiers arriving in Fiji. In this series, we will hear from renowned Girmit historians and creative artists. In this episode, we will be hearing from Mr. Sayendra Peerthum, who is based in Mauritius. Mr. Peerthum is an historian and responsible for the documentation unit and is permanently based in the research unit of the Apravasi Ghat Trust Fund, which manages the Apravasi Ghat World Heritage Site. This was the landing place of the immigrants in Port Louis in the Republic of Mauritius. Mr. Peerthum is a member of the International Scientific Committee and of the Secretariat of the Indentured Labour Roots project, and he is also the coordinator of the ILRP's Indian Ocean Regional Committee, the Nantes Indentured Labour History Project, and the La Réunion Indentured Labour Scientific Committee. Mr. Peerthum is also a part-time lecturer in history at the University of Mauritius, the Open University of Mauritius, and a Mauritian writer. Over the past 22 years, he has specialized in the study of indentured labor, as well as South Indians, slavery, liberated Africans, maroonage, non-Indian indentured workers, colonial prisons, comparative and quantitative history, amongst many other areas of research. Mr. Peerthum has also published and co-authored on the above-mentioned themes in several academic articles and books in Mauritius, the United States, France, La Réunion, South Africa, India, Zanzibar, Tanzania. Let us now hear from Mr. Sayendra Peerthum on Mauritian indenture.
Hello, my name is Satyendra Peerthum. I'm a historian based at the Apravasi Ghat Trust Fund at the Apravasi Ghat World Heritage Site in Mauritius, Port Louis, Mauritius. I'm also a writer, historian, and also a lecturer. I'm also a member of the Indentured Labour Roots Project's International Scientific Committee, and I'm also the coordinator and chairman of the Indian Ocean Committee of the Indentured Labour Roots Project. I'm here today to do a presentation or to present you the history of Mauritius dealing with indentured labor, the experiences of indentured laborers, and also of the indentured sites in my country. First of all, I would like to wish my fellow Fijian brothers and sisters, descendants of indentured laborers and aficionados of history, a happy Indian Arrival Immigrants Day and wish you all the best. So basically, I would just like to start to show that there are similarities between Mauritius and Fiji. First of all, Governor Gounder came to Mauritius after leaving Trinidad and before going to Fiji. And his experience in Mauritius of several years used as a model for his experience in Fiji of introducing indentured laborers. Secondly, Manilal Doctor came to Mauritius in the 1907 to 1911 before going off to Fiji, where he served the people there. And his experience, again, just like Gounder, served him a lot, and where he promoted and fought for the rights of the Indians in Fiji. And of course, there are laws that were enacted in Mauritius during the early period of indenture in the 1840s, 50s, and 60s, which were emulated and used in Fiji between the 1870s and the early 1900s. And of course, there are some Indians who came to Mauritius. They worked here, lived here, and then went to work in Fiji before going to India during the intermediary period. And also some Indians who worked in Fiji also came to Mauritius. So we can see the links there of what we call sinews of empire, that there was this movement of immigrants, and there is a similarity between the history of indentured labor in Mauritius and Fiji. In Mauritius, indentured labor began at different stages, 1826, 1834, and 1842. First of all, between 1826 to 1842, it was a private initiative when more than 28,000 Indian and other non-Indian immigrant men, women, and children came to serve on their contract. And I can tell you from 1826 to 1834, we received 2,200 immigrants. Neighboring Réunion Island also received 3,000 immigrants, mostly coming from India. From 1834 to 1842, when it was a private initiative of the Mauritian planters, British planters based here in Mauritius, and some colored and Indian planters and businessmen and merchants and traders and negociants. around 26,000 Indian immigrants were introduced through their own means at a cost of more than £250,000. As of 1843, it became state-controlled and state-sponsored, and the vast majority came during this period from 1843 to 1910. 1843, an immigration depot was established, and the one at Apravasi Ghat was opened on the 1st of May, 1849. And around 350,000 Indians and non-Indians, men, women, and children transited there. And one thing that we must bear in mind, that in Mauritius, out of the 462,800 who came, around 2/3 or 300,000 remain in the colony and are the ancestors of 80% of the ancestors of the Mauritian population. And at the same time, around 1/3 or 167,000 when returned to India. However, we can also say that there are between 20,000 to 15,000 Indians and non-Indians who went back to their homeland and came back to Mauritius, hinting at the notion of circular migration. And there are 15,000 Indo-Mauritians and other Mauritians who emigrated from Mauritius and went back to their countries of origin. It can be India, China, Madagascar, East Africa, Reunion Island, Sri Lanka, Burma, and even as far afield as Oman and Muscat and Aden in Yemen. So it brings me to the first important phases of Mauritian history. First of all, there was a labor revolution, a demographic revolution, an economic or sugar revolution, the parceling of land in what is known as the Grand Morcellement movement, and the end of indenture, and what happened after with the rise of the working class movements during the 1930s and 1940s. Once again, we see the similarities with other colonies across the British Empire, including Trinidad, South Africa, in La Réunion, in the French possessions, and from what I understand, also in Fiji and in Queensland. There was this awakening of the working class who are the descendants of the immigrants. In Mauritius, the labor revolution began in 1834 with the arrival on the 2nd of November, 1834, the day what we commemorate here on the national event as a national commemoration. It's a national holiday. The arrival of 36 hill coolies from India, and they were brought to work on a sugar estate here in Mauritius. And the thing that we must remember that they were the trailblazers. They ushered in a new system, where a new labor system, a modern contractual labor system, which would exist not only in Mauritius, but it would be replicated in at least 68 or 67 other colonies, territories throughout the world, throughout the former plantation world, from the 1830s right up until the 1940s. And it would involve around 5.2 million Indian, other Asians, Chinese, Japanese, Europeans, Africans, Arabs, Melanesians, people from Oceania, men, women, and children. And it touched more societies than even slavery, although numerically it's much more inferior, smaller in numbers, that I mean. And Mauritius was the third one after Burma and after Ceylon to have received the most, okay, followed by Assam. So basically, this labor revolution, it hints at the fact that 1835, 1st of February, slavery is abolished. And that is why immigrants were brought to work on the sugarcane fields. Of course, Mauritius had a long-standing relationship with India, going back to the Dutch period in the 1600s, the French period in the 1700s, and the early British period when Indian convicts, liberated Africans were brought. So Mauritius experimented with different types of labor systems. And when they were brought, the 36 hill coolies or immigrants, 98% or 95% of the workforce was of Afro-Malagasy and with some Indian origin and some local-born slaves. However, within a decade, by 1844, around 95 or 96% of the workforce was mostly of Indian and some non-Indian origin, who were contract workers working on many of the island's sugar estates. This scale of labor revolution did not take place in most of in other places in the world. The other point to show is the demographic revolution here in Mauritius. In 1834, when the immigrants first came in large numbers in the 1830s, less than 6% or 7% of the population was of Indian origin. By 1860, a generation later, it is more than 60 to 65% of the population which is of Indian origins. By 1865, with the peak of immigration, we have around 100,000 Indians and some Indo-Mauritians working and laboring on the sugar estates. Now we talk about demographic revolution, economic revolution. In terms of economic revolution, is that in 1825, thanks to the British government and the House of Commons, the Mauritius Trade Act was enacted, which launched the sugar revolution from 1825 until 1865, when it started to decline. By 1830, Mauritius was a monocrop economy, and it was producing sugar. It was its main produce. By 1844, around most of the Mauritius became the largest producer in the British Empire. By 1857, Mauritius was producing 7.5% of the world's sugar in 8 small districts. By 1865, there were around 303 sugar mills on 265 sugar estates, where 100,000 to 110,000 Indian men, women, and children and other non-Indians worked or labored on some type of contract, oral or verbal, long-term or short-term contracts. So it showed the sugar revolution in the making. After this period, there would be a decline in terms of the importation of Indian immigrants, and there would be a rise of an endogenous or a local-born workforce. The other main points to retain is the Grand Morcellement movement, which took place from the 1860s right up until the 1930s. It was meaning the parceling of sugar estates and of land, when Indians in Mauritius and some Indo-Mauritians became landowners. There was the rise of a small planter class. Very simple. During that period, from 1860 to 1930, around 20 to 25,000 Indian immigrants and some non-Indian immigrants, and also the Indo-Mauritians, purchased anywhere from 90 to 100,000 acres of land for more than 50 million rupees. And they, by the 1920s and 1930s, became landowners of almost 45 to 50%, almost half of the colony's arable land. And to a certain extent, it would not be an exaggeration to say that they even saved the sugar industry from the point of view that this small planter class of thousands of sugarcane growers and smaller cane growers, they produced something around 30% or 35% of the colony's sugarcane and 20 to 25% of the colony's sugar. And they played an important role also in investing money in the sugar industry and also in sugar production. Now, it brings me to the Apravasi Ghat World Heritage Site. It was constructed in 1849. It was in service until 1910. It welcomed 350,000 Indians and non-Indians, as I mentioned. And it was expanded in the 1860s. By 1859, there would, on any given year, you could have 30 to 35,000 Indian immigrants coming in the colony and some liberated Africans. By 1865, it was peak of immigration. It was modernized. It was split into two, where the railways passed through the immigration depot. It was known as the Immigration Department, the Department of Immigrants. It was managed by a protector of immigrants. By 1870s, there's the decline of number of immigrants coming, and it also served as a place where returning immigrants would pass through. They would also get their ticket signed there. They would also be photographed. In Mauritius, in our archives, which has been inscribed on the Memory of the World Register of UNESCO, around 175,000 were photographed there. In total, from 1865 to 1915, 300,000, mostly Indian immigrants, men, women, and children, were photographed there. And most of our records today are located at the MG Archives and the Mauritius National Archives. And by 1910, immigration ended with the arrival of the last ship to Mauritius. And from 1910 to 1950, it became the Poor Law Commission Office. By 1987, the Apravasi Ghat, or then known as Coolie Ghat or Immigration Depot, the name was changed because of the pejorative term. It was decreed National Heritage in April 1987. By 16th of July 2006, it became a World Heritage Site, the first indenture site to be listed on UNESCO. We have 1,300 sites across the world in more than 70 to 80 countries, and Mauritius has the only immigration depot that has been fully preserved, although it's only 30% of the sites that remains today. And in Mauritius, 2nd of November is the date that we commemorate the arrival of our immigrant ancestors, where we pay tribute to them, a homage to them for all that they have done. In Mauritius, shortly after the end of indenture in 1910, we had the Indians, who were Hindus, Muslims, and Christians. And I can tell you, when looking at indentured labor in Mauritius, they came from almost all the places in South Asia, as far afield as Bhutan, Assam, Baluchistan, Afghanistan, Kashmir, beyond the traditional places, even Madhya Pradesh, Orissa, etc. Although the bulk coming from Bihar, East Bengal, Jharkhand, Uttar Pradesh, Maharashtra, Karnataka, the Telugu-speaking districts in South India, Tamil Nadu. So we can see it was a very diverse population of Hindus, Muslim, Christians, and some tribals. And in Mauritius, we pay homage to them. And Mauritian historiography can be dated to the 1920s to the 1930s, 1940s. So you can see in Mauritius, there's a rich and long tradition of writing about our history. dating to the 1920s, 1930s, almost 90 to 100 years, almost a century of rich, complex historiography that we have, where we have been exploring. And especially in the last 30 to 40 years that we have focused more on the immigrants themselves, their experiences, and on various categories of the immigrants who came: women, children, gender, the family, tribals, those that when they purchased land, the subaltern perspectives, history from below. So this has been part of the rich tradition in Mauritius that we have covered. And in Mauritius, once again, I take this opportunity to thank the organizers of this event and Dr. Farzana Gounder for giving me this chance to address you on this very special occasion. And I wish you all the best, Godspeed. And we are just continuing this tradition of commemorations that in Mauritius started in the 1930s, right through the 1980s until the present day. And it's taking place not only in Fiji and Mauritius and La Réunion, but also in South Africa, Guyana, Trinidad, and the rest of the Caribbean and different parts of the world. And this is what we say in French, it is our devoir de mémoire, where we have to pay tribute to our immigrant ancestor, because the great sacrifices, toils, and tears that they shed for us, because after all, as V.S. Naipaul said, we carry their names, their blood flows through our veins, they form part of our identity, and our history is a continuation of their history. Thank you very much. Happy commemorations and Godspeed.